Okay, well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning, which is on the changes being implemented by the UK government to the immigration arrangements for migrant workers, including a new global business mobility visa and some other new routes and changes. I'm Ed Hussey and I lead our outsourced HR services for Menzies, and I'm joined this morning by Adam Williams from DMH Stallard, where he's a partner, employment lawyer and head of their business immigration services. Good morning, Adam.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Ed, for having me.
Pleasure. Adam is our go-to person on immigration, and I'm very much with you, the audience, this morning, eager to find out what's going on, the extent to which we are helping clients with global mobility issues over the last couple of years has grown exponentially for reasons I probably don't need to explain. And just when you think you've got a handle on things, they move the chairs around and you have to start again. And we'll find out in a minute how much of an exaggeration that statement is. Before we launch into it, though, just a couple of housekeeping items. Please do ask your questions. Put them in the Q&A box if that's okay, and we will get to as many of them as we can during or more likely after the main session. And if we can't get to them this morning, we will certainly follow up with you afterwards. You've probably realised that we are recording the session, and so we will send you the link and it will be available afterwards so that you can view it again or send a link as a gift to your friends, that kind of thing. And finally, just to say, there isn't time on one webinar to deal with all of the cross-border tax, payroll, social security and other employment issues that go along with these type of international moves. But that's where we at Menzies can come into things. So if you've got those kind of questions, please do get in touch with us afterwards and we will certainly help you with those. Now, to begin with, we're going to do a short poll because we think if you're attending this webinar, you're probably in one of three broad categories, and it would be helpful for us to understand which of those you're in, just to help us focus. And so I think they're up on the screen now. So you're either an employer already established in the UK, but you don't yet have or don't have a license to sponsor workers under the UK points-based system, or you're an employer already established in the UK who does already have a sponsor license, or you're overseas, but you're needing to send one or more workers into the UK, either temporarily or permanently, to carry out work. And if you're in none of those, or you're not sure, there's a fourth option there. So please do complete that for us, and it will help Adam to focus in the right areas. Oh, okay, so the results are we've got a fairly even split actually between, well, I suppose roughly half of you are in the UK employers, of which about half again have a sponsor license and the other half don't. So that's 25% with a sponsor license, 20% without. And then about 15% of you are an overseas business looking to send people into the UK. And then the rest, and about 40% of you are in a not sure or in a different category. So thank you. I think that's a helpful insight for us as we move forward, so that we can give the right emphasis in the right places. So I'm going to kick off now and with you, Adam, and kind of the Home Office has been known to fanfare changes in the past that turn out to be relatively cosmetic. I haven't noticed them particularly heralding these changes, and yet they do, on first appearance, seem to be quite extensive. Am I right? And can you just sort of summarize for us what's actually changing here?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, you are right. There was lots of fanfare around the end of 2020 going into 2021 when the Home Office publicised widely that there was going to be a new immigration system, an entirely new system. And actually, there were some very helpful changes that were brought in around that time that made the system slightly easier to to access and use as an employer in some ways, but a lot of it was relabeling and sort of just iterative changes. These changes, which technically the rules have come in since early April, have received little or no publication and fanfare, but they are actually in many ways much more substantial. So it's slightly odd that that's the case, but obviously that's why we want to do sessions like this, to let people know exactly the extent of the changes. The background or the backdrop to it is that there was some simplification of what was known as the intra-company transfer visas for UK employers who had connected entities overseas at the end of 2020. That then has followed this launch of the global business mobility route, and we're told that the sponsorship system itself that employers must use in order to facilitate the visa applications and transfer of workers to the UK will be relaunched in the spring of next year, and that will be gratefully received by sponsors. It's been talked about for a long time, and it will hopefully make the system much more intuitive. It works, the online sponsorship system, but it's quite an old-fashioned back-end software sitting behind it, so it's not the most intuitive systems. So that's the sort of history leading up to this. Sorry, Ed, go on.
I know. Sorry, is that in terms of those changes to the sponsor? Is that the system you use once you've become a sponsor, or will it also simplify the process of becoming a sponsor?
They have been simplifying the process of becoming a sponsor, and the Home Office's stated aim is to continue doing that with sort of automated checks. So it may be the direction of travel seems to be towards, for example, when you apply for a license, you would be sending in things like your original certificate of VAT registration, part of their assessment that you're a genuine UK business. Well, direction of travel suggests that at some point, hopefully, you put in your VAT reg number, and their system will check the records and show, yes, that's a genuine VAT reg number, it's for that business, and that you move on. So there is an intention to do that. I think the spring 2023 changes are more intended to be focused on the actual, what we call the sponsorship management system, the online portal, to try and make that easier. And that will be very helpful because, of course, since Brexit, we've now got 500 million people, not all of them of working age, of course, but 500 million Europeans roughly, who, unless they have pre-Brexit rights to be in the UK, all have immigration control. And so it's put greater pressure on that system and greater emphasis on it being user-friendly. So that will be great. In terms of these changes that have come in, they've been launched alongside a couple of other routes, which we won't spend a lot of time on today, but things like a high potential individual visa, which is for students who've graduated recently from a list of what the UK Home Office consider to be leading universities, where they can get a 2 or 3 year visa to work in unsponsored roles. That's quite a valuable thing there. One of the big shifts has been this bringing together, launching new routes and reforming and expanding other routes around the area of interconnectedness, I would call it, between employer operations in the UK and overseas. And a lot of the expansion has taken that interconnectedness away from just, well, we have a company or branch in the UK that employs people in the UK, and we have a company or branch in India that employs people there, to other examples like, well, we're a business in the UK and there is a business in India and we have a high value contract, so we want to second someone from India to the UK, or we're a client in the UK of a European service provider and we want them to be able to send their workers to us to install and build our plant or whatever it might be that they're providing, which of course pre-Brexit they would just have free movement, so they'd come over the border, it would be seamless, frictionless. Now we've got friction there, so there's a lot going on. Is it helpful if I just have a quick chat at this slide now, Ed, or
Yes, do. I was just thinking that example you just gave of where you've got I mean, certainly clients that we have who are based overseas but servicing a contract in the UK and need to send people in for a period of time in order to be able to support that. That sounds like a potentially quite useful change. So, but anyway, we'll maybe come back to that.
Yes, I think what we'll do, that the slight disappointment people might feel with these changes is that in principle they sound like they work for business and they're great, and that's what we want. You then get to the point of, okay, what do you have to do in order to implement this and be a sponsor? And yeah, we should perhaps come back to that, because it's far from seamless and fluid. It takes care and effort to set it up. And there's often a very important analysis that needs to be made between the time and effort and cost of setting it up as against the benefit, and whether there are other ways of achieving the contractual, for example, in your example, objectives that are more optimal. That's the really frustrating thing. And that's what the team, my team, a lot of our focus is on, making sure that we're helping businesses assess that and make that decision and try to make it as optimal and seamless as we can. But there are parts of the rules that you just look at and think, that's just so unhelpful from a practical commercial perspective, that you have to do this or that. So yeah, in terms of the then and now, I put here, and they are matching up from top to bottom. I've put a box for the old routes, as I've called them, 5 principal routes there that are impacted by the new global business mobility banner. Really, it's an overarching term for a number of new routes, and then the corresponding route on the other side. So working from the top down, we've had a non-sponsored, so you didn't need a formal sponsor for a visa for this, and non-points based. So it wasn't a case of having to show you've scored points for English language and points for the salary that you'd receive visa, called Representative of an Overseas Business Visa, which was all about an overseas business that might have had some trade into the UK, but no actual presence here of trading. Might have started to look at it, maybe incorporated a company, but not done anything with it yet. And they can informally sponsor, through letters of support and evidence, an application by one individual to come to the UK and establish that branch. It was a very flexible route, which made it helpful in many ways. And you were really focused on showing that the individual is a genuine senior employee of the business and who will have authority to run and get the business going in the UK. That has now been switched over to a global business mobility sub-route called UK Expansion Worker, where the plus sides are you can now bring up to 5 people over as a sort of team to expand the business. But on the downside, and this is a theme that we'll see today in a number of areas, there's now an obligation for formal sponsorship. And this is very unheard of and unusual, this process, compared to what we've known on UK visas, because the sponsorship and the sponsor will actually be applied from abroad. So because inevitably you're not meant to be set up in the UK yet, you're going to have a business in Mumbai seeking a sort of provisional sponsorship license, then sending their people over, then those people getting that changed into a full license. So that's all around setup of a business in the UK. You've got intra-company transfer on the left there, next one, which was the most commonly used visa for moves between businesses over from into the UK from abroad. The actual requirements of that visa are largely unchanged, but it now is called a senior or specialist worker route under global business mobility. So ICT is gone, it's dead, and is now rebranded in that way. If anybody has a sponsor license already and they were registered to sponsor ICT visas, they will have been converted to senior or specialist worker already. Probably haven't noticed that they've been told about that. It's probably somewhere on their SMS system, but it's just kind of happened, which is slightly disconcerting in the way that sometimes happens with Home Office. You've got an intra-company graduate trainee route that we had, not that commonly used, but where you could send a limited number of people into the UK each year, where there was a structured graduate trainee program. That's now become graduate trainee worker under global business mobility. And there are some important changes there now, including that the number of people you can bring over each year is not limited anymore. But again, there's going to be a big emphasis on evidencing a structured graduate training program and sponsorship from the UK entity. The next one we had is T5, and it used to be called Tier 5. That was the overarching description for temporary work routes. It was the 5th tier of the old system. International agreement, which was about service suppliers and saying if you have a contract between a UK entity and an entity overseas, the overseas entity is a service supplier, and there's an international trade agreement governing this service provision, you could use T5 to sponsor workers of that non-UK supplier to come over to the UK for certain periods. we've now got that rolled into what's called the service suppliers worker route. And again, largely the process is unchanged, but the emphasis has become much more great in terms of the need to use it. So with the relaunching, there's a couple of changes we'll go through maybe later, but for example, now under the new service supply model, the sponsor must register details of their eligible contracts and the overseas service provider that they have them with, whereas previously that was all done at the point of visa sponsorship. And subcontracting is expressly permitted as well now in the rules. So there's important changes there. Finally, secondments. Previously, there was no dedicated route for secondments. There wasn't a secondment worker route. You used to have to try and find a way to make it work under intra-company transfer, but often the pay minimums there and the skill level requirements were preventative. They were too high. So happily, there is now an entirely new secondment worker route, and we can touch on that in a bit of detail if that's of help later in terms of, well, what does sponsorship mean under that route, and there's some requirements around the value of the contract underlying the secondment. So lots of change. A lot of it is new terminology. There are also some very material changes and additions of new routes. So it's something that businesses, certainly if you're an interconnected business, you have connections overseas, could be really important.
Okay, so it sounds like quite a lot going on. And let me just remind those of you who've joined us that if you've got questions, immediate questions arising from that overview that Adam's given us, please do post your questions in the Q&A, because we'd very much like to, there's all sorts of obviously angles on and detail in this. And if we can focus it on your particular circumstances, then please do let us know and we'll be happy to do that. So Adam, what those are the kind of changes to the routes. Are there other changes? Are they all inherent in what you've told us, or are there other things that are going on that we need to know, or should we perhaps drill down a bit into some of the implications of what you've just told us?
Yeah, I think that's helpful. There may be questions come up at the higher level about, well, how does this work? And we might see some questions that have come through around that. And in fact, we've got a question come through now, which I might just have a look at in terms of general questions. And it's actually about employers employing overseas employees on UK contracts, but they remain wholly overseas and paid overseas. Do they need any authority to do that? That's an interesting question, because that touches on the interconnectedness. In actual fact, if the physical individual always remains outside of the UK borders, then there is simply no question or issue around immigration from the perspective of the work that I do, really, around UK immigration rules. The Home Office here is only going to be interested in what you are doing inside our borders. So there isn't an issue there. The question really becomes, and it's about pulling together the right support team, and this is something that Menzies do, and I work with Menzies a lot on this, is actually, the question then becomes actually, well, what are the implications of that work being done overseas? What country are they in? Do they have the right to do this work in that country? What presence do we intentionally or inadvertently create for us as an employer in that country? Because we may create that presence regardless of the fact that we say that you're on a UK contract that says England and Wales law and that no other rules apply. You might still create unintended payroll or tax consequences. You might inherently and inevitably have employment law, local employment law rights, etc., etc. So it's actually, the emphasis becomes those things, and you wouldn't be looking at these routes, because of course it's really the rules of the country where the work is being done that are going to really loom large for rights to work perspectives. So I hope that's answered that question. I think I've got another slide which we might look at, Ed.
Sure. Yeah.
This point, maybe that'll help to take us through. You talked about that, so we dive a little bit deeper into it. Yeah. These are some common themes or requirements for global business mobility, but there are exceptions depending on which route you're in. And we'll draw some of those out, I'm sure, as we go through some of the other examples. So the key and common themes are that for most visa sponsorships for the global business mobility routes, there is a skill level requirement, and this is focused on the role, not the individual. Although I should say the individual needs to look genuinely appropriate for the role. So there does need to be some correlation between the skill level requirements of the role and the aptitude of the individual. A particular emphasis on that under the service supplier route. There are actually additional rules around the number of years experience that the worker of the service supplier has, together with how long they've worked for the service supplier. But RQF level 6 on most of these visas, and that's graduate level or equivalent. So what happens there is, as a sponsor, as you do with the much more common skilled worker visa route, which is a you don't have to have any connection with an overseas entity. It's a sponsored route for a skilled role that you just need to bring someone into the UK to perform. Doesn't have to have any connection with outside the UK. That's an RQF level 3 requirement, so A level. And in the same way, you would look at the role you're intending the person to come to the UK to do. You'd find the closest matching occupational classification. The Office for National Statistics has 4-digit codes for this. And then you'd look on the list of the immigration rules relevant appendix and say, well, where does that classification sit? And in those rules, it will, if it's on the list, you know that it qualifies for A level, so it's skilled worker. But if you're then looking at global business mobility, and as I say, most often you need RQF level 6, you have to track across and see whether it's got written in it that that role is also global business mobility eligible. So there's a higher skill level there. There's a new concept, which I think is really helpful and quite fluid, around the length of stay in the UK, which unless you're very highly paid in one of these categories, the general rule is now you can stay in the UK for up to 5 out of any 6 years. So you can take that window of time and you could stay for that period. And it's done in that way because you can actually switch around categories freely within the UK. So you could come in as a secondment worker, and then in theory, if it was necessary, you could then switch to become a senior or specialist worker, because maybe, for example, there's a role that the sponsor would like you to do that's more highly paid, more highly skilled. So you now meet those requirements, you could switch into that. You could switch around the routes. So that's an important key principle. But in the vast majority of these cases, you're going to need to look as well at the existing relationship and minimum length of employment with the overseas entity. Whether it's a senior specialist worker where it's 2 employers who are part of the same group, or even if it's a commercial relationship of UK client and service supplier abroad, you will tend to find there are those requirements. And a big change where this didn't apply at all for a couple of those categories we looked at on the last slide, you have to be a sponsor approved by the Home Office. So it's going to ramp up the number of applications that businesses need to make to get that sponsor approval. And with that comes obligations around your systems and setup, because when you apply to be a sponsor, there's 2 key things really that the Home Office look at, aside from any relevant evidence you need for the type of sponsorship. So for example, if you're a service supplier, you're going to need to show the contract and that it's governed by a trade agreement, international trade agreement. You park those specific ones for any sponsorship application. The Home Office is going to say, are you a genuine business? And are we able to trust you in terms of your systems and personnel to manage this license? And importantly, most importantly, not lose anybody in the UK system because you brought them in and then they disappear and you don't know where they are. So things like record keeping and reporting. Do you have systems in place? There's a lot of emphasis on that. And we're doing, as we have been for many, many years, but doing a lot of work at the moment with post-Brexit, and a lot of people now, employers now becoming sponsors around that piece of, well, look, we know you're eligible for sponsorship. We're going to get the license and apply for the license, but actually that's just the start. Let's make sure you've adapted your systems to make, A, to get the most out of sponsorship, but B, also to manage any risk around compliance. Assignments are temporary, but as I said, workers can move between the routes. And the last point is probably one of the, if I was going to give people key takeaways about, well, what does global business mobility mean and why is it distinct? Why might it be interesting in comparison to the more common skilled worker route? This is one of them, that there's no English language requirements for global business mobility routes. So if you've got workers where you know or think they cannot demonstrate what is quite a high hurdle of English language competency because they haven't studied a degree in an English speaking country, or they just won't be able to pass a level B1 English language test, which is the current standard, which is not, not insignificant, that standard. Skilled worker route is closed to you. So you suddenly need to look elsewhere for how that's going to work. And whilst I'm on that subject, one of the other key takeaways I think from today would be, if the employment relationship is not typical, so it's not typical UK employer wants to sponsor a worker for a role that just comes to the UK. There is a commercial relationship between two parties, a high value contract that therefore we want to second someone, or this service supplier bit, or actually we're not yet present in the UK, we want to set up in the UK. That's when this route comes to the fore now. So yeah, lots of change. I think that those are the only slides I wanted to really talk to, because I know I want to keep this open and the discussion around question and answers. I know that's the way we want to do the session today, but I think hopefully that's a helpful backdrop to what these routes are all about.
So can I ask you, Adam, because for that 15% of people who are overseas and looking to send people in, I think if I understood you correctly, they may now need to apply for a sponsor license before they come to the UK, which is quite a big change. And I know that we've supported many clients who are new in the UK who need to get a sponsor license, and some of the questions about how established you are as an employer can be a bit tricky when you've only just arrived. So it feels that we're taking quite a big step to saying, you know, you now don't even need to be here to apply for a sponsor license. So how does that work? How are they going to assess your suitability for a sponsor license that you might now need if you're looking to come to the UK? And how straightforward do you think that might be?
It's not going to be straightforward. That's probably one of the biggest gear changes, I think, in these rules. Under the old position, it was much more fluid. As I said, you'd look and say, is the UK presence actively trading yet? If it is, you can't use the sole rep idea of send someone in to grow it. You're going to have to build it locally and find someone in the UK who's your trusted country manager, or whatever you want to call it, who will get you the license because you're an established UK employer now, and then you bring people in. Or we'd look and go, no, you're not actively trading yet, you haven't passed that tipping point, so let's just apply for the sole rep visa, get your chosen person in from abroad, and they will then do those things. And actually, you might not become a visa sponsor at all for many years. Because if they come into the UK and establish it and say, which is not that likely, unfortunately, these days with skills shortages, it'd be nice to think this is very common, but they look and go, there's a wealth of people in the UK local domestic labour market that can do roles. We're just going to hire locally. Great. And in that scenario, they wouldn't apply for a sponsor license, you know, at all. So sponsorship wouldn't really come up with the Home Office. Now we're looking at a very different model. So what really the essence, and this is still being felt through, I think, even by the Home Office, exactly how they assess these applications. But what the UK expansion worker route now really says is you must have either a UK premises or a company's house registration, but you must not have begun trading. So that's a bit more prescriptive than it was. You must have an overseas business, which is the same principle, but actively trading, and normally it must have traded for at least 3 years. And also now you must be able to demonstrate credible expansion plans, which is again more formalization of the route. So what is your credible plan for expansion? Can you finance the expansion, which previously really the Home Office didn't get too much into. And the Home Office says now we'd normally expect they've done some preparatory work for the expansion and they're a stable growing business. So they're going to focus on that. They're also going to focus on key personnel, which has always been a requirement. If you're in the UK and set up, you've got to have a senior individual. Previously, though, had to be based in the UK already, who would be your authorizing officer, for example. If we're in the cold, hard light of day, in reality, we're talking about senior people with responsibility that we can come and sit down and tell off, or worse, give sanctions to if you don't play ball, if you don't do things right. Now there's a new process for that, where there's no suitable settled worker in the UK. You get given a provisional rating of sponsor, where you say, look, we've got a person that we're proposing to send to the UK, and we want to sponsor UK expansion. You get that provisional sponsor status. So you're in probation really in language ed that you would use in your employment support team. And we'll give you one certificate of sponsorship, which is a unique reference number that is then used to get your visa to come to the UK. And then your authorizing officer, that senior person who's going to be responsible for the license, is your first worker sponsored. And then once they're in, you can seek that re-rating. Say, I'm not provisional anymore. We as a business are here. We want to have our A rating, which is like the baseline really for sponsors. You want A rating as standard. You don't want to be downgraded to B rating. And then you can request additional COS. So there's a two-stage process to that, because then once that's happened, there's another opportunity for up to 4 further certificates to then be used to bring in other colleagues. So you've got your first person coming in. If there's already a suitable settled worker that you want to appoint as your authorizing officer, then the process is pretty much as before. They would be settled in the UK. You'd apply for your full license and get your A-rated license from the off, because they're already here and they've set things up. And you'd have a full 5. You wouldn't have lost one of your 5 potential expansion worker COSs, certificates. You'd have a full 5. So you could bring in a full 5 colleagues to join that UK-based worker in the UK. So that's broadly how it's going to work. A very different model to what we've been used to, and it's just much more prescriptive, really, than it was before.
Okay, let's put that into a bit of context with a question that we received in advance of the webinar, which was about asking about a visa for people coming into the country who needed to be here for a period longer than 6 months. So they are employees of an overseas company, a subcontractor of the UK company. So subcontractor from Poland. We as a German-based company fulfilling a project in the UK with a client of the automotive industry. So it looks like you've got a requirement for work in the UK that a German company is going to fulfill by asking subcontractors from Poland to come for a temporary period, but probably longer than 6 months to fulfill.
You and I are seeing a lot of this, Ed, aren't we?
Yeah, we are. Yeah.
Post-Brexit, and now we kind of perceive this. You and I did a webinar, it's a long while ago now, at least maybe a year or so ago, we were saying that we perceived a sort of slightly delayed reaction or impact from Brexit, because pandemic borders were closed and things hadn't opened up. We really are seeing now that reopening and the effect of it. A key issue here is around how do you manage the amount of time in the UK, and how can you facilitate the right to carry out the activities? And a key point there is between visitor and worker, because there are not very well known but quite discreet rules around the business permitted activities of visitors that you might be able to pull on here to make this work. Now, our question, the person asking our question is already alive to a key point, which is visits are for up to 6 months as a maximum. And actually, even then, that's not an entitlement, it's not a right to visit for 6 months. And by that, the point I'm trying to make there is, yes, it's up to 6 months, but if you go to the Home Office and say, I'm a visitor, but I'm going to be here for 5.5 months doing these sorts of business activities, there's a much greater chance that Home Office will look and go, you're not really a visitor then. So the longer the stay, there is a greater risk. But you look at that because it's a much more optimized, fluid, frictionless process. And there are options to obtain multi-entry visitor visas for business activities. So I think one thing that we would be looking at for this question, if we were supporting the business, would be, let's look at the nature of the activities. Do they fall within some of those things that are permitted to visitors? Is it better then that you have them in the UK for a total period of more than 6 months, but they're visiting for only up to 6 months at a time, then they leave, then they come back, and we present that as the genuine operating model of a business visitor that's permitted. If you look at that and say that can't work or won't work, or we don't want to do it that way for a number of reasons, you are then shifting over to, okay, well, you most likely need work visas. We don't really have a concept of work permits, but if you're in Poland, Germany, that may be the language you're thinking of. The right to reside and work is all wrapped up in this concept of a visa in the UK, which is annoying because it's confusing with the idea of, am I a visa national or not? Do I need a visa even to go across the border? Visa in the UK sense means right of residence and whatever permit you also need, for example, to work or to marry or to receive medical treatment. So you suddenly have that shift, and that's where global business mobility would come in, because most likely you'd be looking at the service supplier route, formerly T5 international agreement, but it is one of those where it's not the most intuitive and seamless and easy one to set up. Because if you look at the service supplier requirements, they're largely unchanged, which means you need the UK ultimate client to get on board and become the sponsor approved by the Home Office of global business mobility service supplier workers. And they're going to need to apply. And as I touched on earlier, one of the new changes is show the eligible contracts they have. We've got a contract. We are UK automotive client X. We have a contract with a German-based company here it is. They subcontract to a Polish company for these activities. Here's the international trade agreement it's covered by, and we want to sponsor the bringing in of workers from either the main or the subcontractor from Germany or Poland to do this work. And we've checked that will actually work, because some of the hallmarks of service supplier eligibility of the worker, well, they're all met. So is it helpful to kind of touch on some of those? I'm just looking in my notes really for what the service supplier hallmarks are. Because I know from the poll at the beginning, there's quite a lot of people on this session that will be thinking about this. And actually, even if you're not the non-UK entity service supplier, you might be finding as a UK employer, well, they're not so much from an HR perspective, but a commercial perspective, we have to pay a fortune and it takes too long to have a UK business supply this service to us. But the one in Poland, for example, is saying we've got a problem about getting people into you though. So, you know, we can deliver it on time and on budget, but we've got a problem getting people in. So it has relevance across that spectrum, I think. So you've got to have the contract under an international trade agreement. There isn't a salary requirement. There's no minimum pay requirement for the workers, because of course the link of employment still remains essentially with the service supplier abroad. The skill level can be below graduate, but the worker has to show they've got a degree relevant to the service, which often we find is not really relevant at all. Degree qualification for the many of the sectors we're looking at may or may not be relevant in this automotive example. Degree that's relevant and or 3 to 6 years experience. And they must have been an existing employee of that overseas entity for 12 months outside the UK. Could have been in broken up periods. So 6 months, then they went and did a project in France, and then they came back and they worked in Poland for another 6 months, and that's got them their 12. They must be a national of the country covered by the relevant trade agreement. And then they get 6 months up to 1 year. So you're not getting a lot of upside on your period of stay. The main upside is it's up to a year, but more importantly, they're able to do all manner of different types of work permitted by a proper role. Whereas in the former example we talked about of business visitor, the upside is it's often just so much easier to implement. The downside is there's such a great emphasis on you're allowed to do this, you are not allowed to do that. So it really is working through, you know, and sometimes you have a combination of the two. You know, for these 15 people, we can use business visitor. For those 10 over there, they're not allowed to do the stuff we need them to do on business visitor. We have to get the UK client to be a sponsor and go through all those hoops. And it's always the way, isn't it? Once you've done it once, it's easier and it works. But that first time is when there's we end up doing a lot of work supporting.
I can imagine, and it sounds like if you have to go the visa route, and then you've got these 50 people who want to come and do this work, the subcontractor's going to have to, determine which one of them. They can't just say, oh yeah, we've got permission, send them all over. They've still got to subdivide those 50 into people who have eligibility and people who don't, depending on how long they've worked for them and all that kind of stuff. So yeah.
And think, yes, exactly. And think about other things that might be sitting in the background, like some of these frontier workers. Can you show they were commuting into the UK to do projects before end of 2020? In which case, maybe you're going down that route, because that's probably somewhere between business visitor and this full sponsorship in terms of its easiness.
Yeah.
And you say, okay, well, brilliant. We found that 6 or 7 of them, for example, they can be frontier workers. So it's and that's what we do, isn't it? And when I'm working with you, we're trying to pull together all those different options and optimize it and say, don't do this really clunky process for everybody if you can do it a different way for some. But it takes a lot of planning. Yeah.
Indeed. And so just another reminder to people, if you want to pose your, the reason why you joined the webinar, if you just want to pop that reason into the Q&A, then very happy to look at that. We've got a little bit more time left. Just before, as people think about that, I'm just thinking about that group who are on the webinar, Adam, who were that sort of 20% who are employers in the UK, don't currently have a sponsor license. And I'm imagining I guess they're either going to be companies who have connected people overseas, who want to bring them in, or they might be people who just think that they're going to need to source talent from overseas because of the current skills shortages, which would be, the kind of the skilled worker route, the one that we're sort of probably more, that's been around a bit longer, the one that we're kind of more familiar with. Are there implications there for that employer? And have things changed for them in relation to these amendments?
Yeah, I think the thing that's changed is we've got a couple of more options in the mix for that sort of. I mean, I think yes, it's from the perspective of those who don't have a license. A lot of the work we're doing at the moment is about that, helping them to understand what value they could get out of the license. What does it really offer? And where do you derive that from? Which routes? And I think the answer is, it may be now that for a specific employer with specific needs, we do end up looking, going, actually, well, we think maybe you need global business mobility secondment worker, because what you're telling us is the pay level's quite low, and we're going to struggle with skilled worker around that, or there's English language issues, because that's not really what you need from these roles. But it's based on it's underlying this is a really high value contract with this massive business in the US. Okay, so look, what you should be thinking about is maybe global business mobility secondment worker. You get your license, you show the contract that's there, and that's going to give you a route where there's you don't have that minimum pay issue, you don't have an English language issue. So I think it's just expanding out that creative thinking. And that's what I do, as the head of the team. That's where I really get involved in the strategic side of it. And what I like doing is giving that support and saying, look, we need to look at your objectives and see how they can be met. And of course, in the most common scenario, what we're seeing is in that, and usually the answer is the skilled worker route, is UK employer either isn't sure whether they have a license or not, or knows they don't, and is looking, going, we can't get the right people, or perhaps anybody. Not even the right people, can't get anybody for these roles. And we want to move away from just waiting for supply, waiting for, for example, if there's a lot of skill, if there's skill and experience in France, waiting for the French national who happens to be able to work in the UK already, and grabbing them and possibly paying over the odds for them. We want to be able to pull the right people from anywhere in the world on demand. And it was already what I've been saying, this is like a broken record and people get bored of it, saying this for a long time, that the only way to really do that is through visa sponsorship, way before April of this year. This has just reaffirmed it, because in April what we've had is a rejigging and launching of new rules around interconnectedness. The big change is it's everything being shifted towards sponsorship. So I think that's the thing. It's saying, look, sponsorship has always been there since 2008. It's here to stay. And actually, the macro environment maybe makes it even more important. Do we need it? Have we got it? If we've got it, do we know we've got it? I mean, 40% of people, and this is not a surprise to me, in the poll said, I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether we've got a sponsor license, if we have, what's under it. And actually, the great thing is they're on this session and they're thinking, somewhere in our business, we need to work that out. Do we have one? Don't we have them? Do we have all the right routes? And if we've got them, are we utilising them?
Mm. I guess the challenge for businesses who don't have a sponsor license, but who are challenged with talent acquisition is, you know, at what point, because getting the sponsor license, it's not free, and it's quite time consuming. It's kind of judging the, you know, when it takes a while to get, sort of making that judgment about, you know, when do we go for it? You know, a lot of people go for it because they've got an they've got a known, you know, person they need to bring in or something, and or they know that that's their plan. They're setting up in the UK, they need to bring people over. It's that, you know, for other people who just want to broaden their talent pool, you know, at what point do they actually decide that that's it's the moment to go for it on a more speculative type of basis?
Really good point, because historically, I've been doing this since around 2008 when the new system came in. Historically, the emphasis from the Home Office was around an expectation. You would have an actual sponsorship in mind. And there was a feeling of, you probably won't get your license if we're just saying, we'd just like to have the option, please. You need to show what sort of role it is you have in mind. Who have you identified? And we've shifted away from that slowly over the years since then, but then much more quickly in the last year or two, towards the Home Office outwardly saying, it's okay, apply if you don't yet have someone in mind, but you think you're going to have a need, particularly around Brexit. And some of that was responding to the concern around Brexit and the fact that free movement was going to end, and employers going, well, we just won't be able to employ anybody. Home Office's response was, no, don't leave it too late. Get your license. Because as a very rough and ready rule, unless you're lucky enough to get the lottery ticket, and the winning prize, by the way, is to pay £500. So it's not a great lottery, but a lottery ticket to pay £500 to get an application for a sponsor license done in a couple of weeks. You've got an 8-week service standard for applications for a license that's at the moment being used up and sometimes being exceeded. And when you add on the time you spend preparing and getting ready to apply for license, you're looking, what, 12 weeks, 3 months. What I think businesses should be thinking about is it possible that we will get an opportunity to do some really amazing work, or bring some really amazing person into the UK business down the line? And is it going to be helpful or not for us to then go, well, this is great, but by the way, we'll see you in 3 months' time, before we can even do this, or indeed you can then resign and know that you've got a job to come to? Or do we need to set that up now, so that we say, when that happens, we're good to go? We've got a license, we know how to use it, and we'll just issue the sponsorships. That's a great point. That I think that's one of the big takeaways. Think about whether you need to get in front of this, even if you don't have a pressing need now.
Good. Well, I know that recruitment challenges are the uppermost issue in our clients' minds, and I'm sure a lot of them are thinking more internationally. And I think there's a demand as well for more international working that is causing people to think very carefully around all of these issues. Before we come to any final questions that people have, we do have a second and final poll. You will, of course, have realised that there are a lot of potential angles to this. And so we'd just like to get a feel from you as to what you'd be interested in as we finish today. What are the things you'd like to learn more about around some of these topics? So if you'd like to just take a quick look at these, and I think you can select as many as you think are relevant to you. That would be very useful for us to be able to shape our further content and sessions. Thank you very much for your contributions there. While people are just finishing that off, Adam, I don't think we've got any other specific questions. I sort of asked with some trepidation whether it's possible to sort of sum up on what's a very kind of complicated set of instructions, but I think, and you've just given a very good idea of, for those people looking at, recruitment challenges, are there any other kind of overarching points that you think are important for people to take away with them from today?
Talk about, from the global business mobility perspective, about the English language thing and about the interconnectedness, and whether there are certain roles that don't classically fall into the more common skilled worker visa, but that this might open up the doorway for. I think also it's about, if you're a business that's needing to either employ or recruit or send people to work in the UK, and you're having any issues or bumps in the road with that, things that are blocking that, it's a good time, and you may find it's very helpful to have some support and guidance on this around what the implications or the options are, to just make a general analysis and assessment of your global footprint. Do we have suppliers in certain countries, and do we have big contracts that might open up to secondment worker in others? And one of the questions that we had, which actually shouldn't touch on UK immigration at all, but is an international mobility question around, we're just going to pay them out in the UK, but they never come here. Where are those people? What are the implications? Are there things we can do to optimize that? And so that you're building that picture and saying, working internationally has always been there, and it's kicked on to a whole new phase with the pandemic, where people have gone and worked abroad, and it's shifted the way we do it. Sometimes it's forced that change on businesses. Let's take stock of where we are, make sure there are no landmines sitting around that we didn't actually know we had, with activities we've got in certain countries and etc., and make sure we maximize all those opportunities. I think that's that. For businesses that are struggling this, there is almost always things that open up when we do that analysis with businesses, and they may be able to do it just themselves, where you go, oh, there's an angle, there's an opportunity there that we can use and exploit, and it's going to meaningfully help the business to achieve its objectives.
No, quite right. And I think that point you alluded to that first question we had, and we certainly are working with a lot of clients who are being reminded that Brexit worked both ways. So it's not just about needing to understand how to get people in here, but understanding the rules now that are in place for workers that you're sending out into Europe, where actually it isn't one homogenous rule in Europe for everybody. There are different rules in terms of immigration and tax in each state, and so we're facilitating a lot of those connections, in terms of people finding out what they need, what their compliance issues are in different overseas countries for people they want to send out.
Yeah, absolutely, and working together on those things.
Yeah,
is hugely important and valuable for businesses. A lot of the work we're doing, where we're really making a difference, is linked to this thing of what I sort of call Remo Max, which is a pretty inelegant way of saying this is remote working to the max. The pandemic meant we were all working at home anyway, so people are just working all over the world, and businesses are like, we don't need them to be in the UK anymore, or indeed we're a Spanish business, we don't need them to be in Spain. But what you do then need to do is look and say, have we got a handle on what the implications of this setup are, though? Because we're now dealing with multi-jurisdiction, borders across which trade, tariffs, transfer, tax implications might apply, social security. It's probably the right model for us. Let's just make sure we're A, optimizing it, and B, we're not unaware of some risks and tax costs or whatever that are lurking there. So, that's the bit that follows on from our reaction to the pandemic, I think, to say, right, let's just make sure this is all optimized. So that's actually beyond the subject matter of today, but probably is relevant and resonates with the people we're talking to today.
Yeah. Okay, well, Adam, thank you so much for your time this morning. It's a complicated, a big subject. Hopefully we've given everyone on the call a flavour of what the changes are. Clearly, your particular scenarios will definitely need some more thought and planning, as indicated, but hopefully we've given you a flavour. And of course, you're more than welcome to follow up with us and Adam with your specific queries and questions going forward. We will be following up with you after this with the slides and a link to the webinar and our details. So please do stay in touch. and hopefully we will see you again soon. Okay, many thanks.